The graduation hall smells of wilted carnations and decades of accumulated dust, the kind that settles deep into velvet curtains and wooden stages worn smooth by countless ceremonies. I stand somewhere in the middle of this restless sea of black caps and gowns, my mortarboard sitting crooked because I forgot to check it in the bathroom mirror 20 minutes ago. The elastic band cuts into my chin. I should fix it, but my hands are trembling and I don't trust them to be steady. Around me, programs rustle like autumn leaves. Someone's mother sobs 3 rows ahead. A baby cries from the balcony. The dean drones on about futures and possibilities, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling in waves that blur together into meaningless sound. I catch fragments, excellence, achievement, the next chapter, but they slide past me like water. My attention keeps drifting, searching, even though I tell myself to stop. There, second row of faculty seats, stage left. Professor Dorian Hale sits with his back perfectly straight, hands folded in his lap like he's attending a board meeting instead of a graduation ceremony. Even from this distance, I can see the sharp line of his jaw, the way he holds his mouth when he's thinking. For 2 years, that mouth has spoken my name with cool precision during roll call, has curved into the thinnest of smiles when I manage to exceed his impossibly high expectations, has pressed it to a disapproving line when my essays fell short of whatever standard he kept locked in his head. I force myself to look away, to focus on the ceremony, but my gaze keeps returning to him like a compass needle finding north. This is ridiculous. In 30 minutes, I'll shake hands with the dean, accept my diploma, and walk out of this place forever. Professor Hale will remain exactly what he's always been, my strictest instructor, the man who made me rewrite my thesis 3 times, who never let me coast on natural ability or charm. He'll return to his office with its towers of books and red pens, and I'll go home to pack for my new job in Portland. That's how these things work. That's how they're supposed to work. But something feels different today. Maybe it's the finality of it all, the way endings make you notice things you've trained yourself to ignore. Or maybe it's the way he looked at me yesterday, when I submitted my final paper. Not with his usual clinical assessment, but with something softer, something that made my chest tighten in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. The student next to me shifts, and her elbow bumps mine. Sarah Chun, I think her name is. We've shared 3 classes over the years, but never really talked. She leans over and whispers something about being nervous, and I nod and smile because that's what you do. But I'm not nervous about graduation or my job or moving to a new city. I'm nervous about the way my heart speeds up every time I catch Professor Hale's profile in my peripheral vision. This is what I've been trying not to think about for months now. The way his voice changed when he called on me in class. Not warmer, exactly, but more attentive, as if my answer mattered more than it should have. The way he lingered after dismissing everyone else, making comments about my work that went beyond mere academic feedback. The way I started arriving early just to watch him arrange his materials, the careful ritual of opening his leather portfolio and setting out his fountain pen. I told myself it was admiration, respect for a demanding teacher who pushed me harder than anyone else ever had. I told myself the flush of heat I felt when he leaned over my desk to point out an error was embarrassment, nothing more. I told myself the dreams were just my subconscious processing stress. But sitting here now, watching him from across this crowded auditorium, I can't lie to myself anymore. The truth sits heavy in my stomach like a stone I've been carrying for 2 years without acknowledging its weight. The dean calls the first row of names. Students file across the stage in alphabetical order, their relief palpable as they receive their diplomas and shake the requisite hands. The photographer's flash goes off in steady intervals, capturing moments that will yellow in photo albums decades from now. I calculate how long until they reach the MS, until they call Nathaniel Morrison, until I have to stand and walk and pretend my legs aren't made of water. Professor Hale hasn't moved. He sits motionless as a statue while chaos swirls around him. Proud parents standing and shouting, siblings whistling, grandmothers dabbing at their eyes with tissue. His composure is absolute, unbreakable, exactly as it's always been. But there's something in the set of his shoulders, a tension I recognize from the day I challenged his interpretation of Fitzgerald in front of the entire class. He'd gone very still then, too, before demolishing my argument with surgical precision. I wonder if he's thinking about endings, too. If he's cataloging all the students who will leave today and never return, who will become names in an address book that grows less current each year. I wonder if any of those names will stick with him the way his has stuck with me. The Ellis are walking now. My row begins to shift, preparing to stand. My mouth goes dry. In a few minutes, this will all be over. The ceremony will end. Families will cluster on the front steps for photographs. And Professor Hale will disappear back into his office or his car or whatever life he leads when he's not standing in front of a classroom breaking down the symbolism in Victorian novels. That should be a relief. It should feel like freedom, graduation as liberation from the strange, complicated knot of feelings I've carried around for 2 years like a secret I couldn't even admit to myself. But instead, it feels like loss, like the end of something I never got to properly begin. The row in front of me stands. Programs flutter to the floor like black and white butterflies. Someone's father cheers prematurely, then sits down red-faced when he realizes his mistake. The dean's voice continues its steady rhythm, names and majors blending together into a litany of accomplishment and possibility. I adjust my cap one final time, running my palm down the front of my gown to smooth non-existent wrinkles. My heart hammers against my ribs. Soon they'll call my name, and I'll walk across that stage, and Professor Hale will watch me go just as he's watched dozens of others before me. I'll become another former student, another face that might prompt a moment of recognition if we pass on the street in 5 years. But for now, for these last few minutes, I am still here. Still his student, technically, until the dean hands me that rolled piece of paper. Still connected to him by the thin thread of academic relationship, inappropriate as it is to think of it that way. Still caught in the orbit of his attention, even if I'm the only one who realizes it. My row stands. The moment has arrived. My name rings out across the auditorium like a bell. Nathaniel Morrison. I rise on unsteady legs, my gown catching briefly on the chair behind me before I smooth it down and step into the aisle. The walk to the stage feels endless, each step measured and deliberate while my pulse hammers in my ears. I keep my eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look toward the faculty section, but I can feel his presence there like heat from a distant fire. The dean's handshake is firm and brief. The diploma feels heavier than it should, the rolled paper warm against my palm. Flash of the photographer's camera, a moment of blindness, then I'm walking down the far side of the stage and back to my seat. It's done. I am no longer Professor Hale's student. The thought should bring relief, but instead it sits hollow in my chest. This is who I've always been, careful, methodical, someone who colors inside the lines. During my first 2 years of college, I claimed the same corner table in the library every afternoon, surrounded by towers of books that formed protective walls around my workspace. I preferred the safety of structure, the comfort of knowing exactly what was expected of me. My transcripts were clean columns of as and BS. Nothing exceptional, but nothing to worry about either. I avoided risks the way some people avoid spiders, instinctively, completely. Then I registered for Professor Hale's Victorian Literature seminar, and everything changed. I remember walking into his classroom that first day, expecting another pleasant, forgettable semester. The room smelled of chalk dust and old books, afternoon light slanting through tall windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. Students chatted quietly while arranging their notebooks and pens with the casual confidence of people who'd never had their certainties challenged. Professor Hale entered precisely at 2 o'clock, his leather portfolio tucked under one arm. He was younger than I'd expected, early 30s, maybe, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it and a jawline that belonged in a Renaissance painting. He set his materials on the desk with careful precision, uncapped his fountain pen, and looked up at us with eyes the color of storm clouds. Then he smiled, and I understood I was in trouble. Not the warm, encouraging smile of professors who wanted to be your friend. This was something sharper, more dangerous. The smile of someone who saw through every defense you'd carefully constructed and found them wanting. He began to speak, and his voice was nothing like what I'd imagined. Not the dry academic tone I expected, but something richer, more textured. He talked about Dickens and social reform, about the way literature could dissect the human heart with surgical precision. Every word was deliberate, chosen for maximum impact. Within 10 minutes, he demolished 3 students' preconceptions about Oliver Twist and made the rest of us question everything we thought we knew about Victorian society. I should have dropped the class. Should have recognized the warning signs, the way my pen hovered over my notebook without writing anything, the way I found myself watching his hands as he gestured instead of listening to his words, the way my stomach twisted when he called on other students but never me. Instead, I stayed. Week after week, I returned to that classroom like a moth drawn to flame, knowing I would probably get burned but unable to stay away. He was merciless. My first essay came back, so, covered in red ink, it looked like a crime scene. Comments filled every margin, not just corrections but challenges. Questions that made me doubt conclusions I'd thought were obvious. Suggestions that pushed me toward ideas I'd never considered. At the bottom, in his precise handwriting, "You're capable of better than this. Do better." I rewrote that essay 3 times before he accepted it. By then, I understood something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't just teaching me about literature. He was teaching me about myself, about the difference between meeting expectations and exceeding them, between safety and growth. He demanded more than I thought I could give, then refused to accept anything less. Other professors praised my work with generic comments about good effort or nice job. Professor Hale dissected every sentence, questioned every assumption, pushed me to defend positions I'd taken for granted. His critiques stung, but beneath the sharp words I began to sense something else, a kind of focused attention that felt almost intimate. He saw potential in me that no one else had bothered to notice, including myself. The strange thing was how much I began to crave that attention. I started spending extra hours on his assignments, researching obscure details that might impress him, crafting sentences with the care of someone polishing gemstones. I told myself it was about academic excellence, about rising to meet his standards. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I had to admit the truth was more complicated. I began arriving to class early, ostensibly to review my notes, but really to watch him prepare. The ritual was always the same. Portfolio opened with methodical care, materials arranged in precise order, fountain pen uncapped and set at exactly the right angle. Sometimes he would glance up and catch me watching, and something would flicker across his expression too quickly for me to interpret. Not disapproval, exactly. Something more complex. The semester progressed, and with it came a growing awareness that I was walking a tightrope I hadn't meant to step onto. Every interaction felt charged with subtext I didn't dare examine. When he leaned over my desk to point out an error, the scent of his cologne made my thoughts scatter. When he praised a particularly insightful comment, warmth spread through my chest like spilled wine. When he was harder on me than anyone else in class, I told myself it was because he expected more from me, because I mattered to him in some indefinable way. Now, sitting in this graduation ceremony with my diploma finally in hand, I realize I've been fooling myself about what I wanted from him all along. The ceremony ends with a collective exhale of relief and accomplishment. Caps sail through the air like black butterflies against the fluorescent lights, though mine remains firmly on my head. I've never been one for grand gestures. Around me, families surge forward in a chaos of hugs and photographs, voices rising in celebration and congratulation. The orderly rows of students dissolve into scattered clusters, everyone searching for familiar faces in the crowd. I gather my things slowly, in no particular hurry to join the melee. My parents are somewhere in the audience. I spotted them earlier, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, my father checking his watch. They'll find me eventually, armed with cameras and proud smiles and plans for dinner at the nice restaurant downtown. But for now, I'm content to let the crowd thin around me, to breathe in these last few moments of being a student in this place. The faculty members have risen from their seats, and begun filing out through a side door that leads backstage. I catch glimpses of Professor Hale among them, his profile sharp against the institutional beige of the walls. He moves with the same measured precision he brings to everything, unhurried despite the chaos around him. For a moment, I think he might disappear entirely, swallowed by the maze of corridors that honeycomb the building's interior. Then he stops, turns. His eyes scan the dispersing crowd of graduates until they find mine across the distance. The recognition hits like a physical thing, a jolt of electricity that travels from my chest to my fingertips. He's looking at me, not through me, not past me to someone more important, but directly at me with an intensity that makes my breath catch. Even from here, I can see something different in his expression, not the clinical assessment I'm used to, but something softer, more uncertain. He changes direction, moving against the flow of faculty members toward the main auditorium. My pulse quickens. This isn't how these things usually work. Professors shake hands in the receiving line, offer generic congratulations, maybe pose for a photo if parents insist. They don't seek out individual students in the aftermath of ceremony. They don't look at former pupils with eyes that seem to hold questions they haven't learned how to ask. I stand frozen as he navigates through the crowd, offering polite smiles to passing families, but never breaking stride. His usual composure is intact, but somehow fragile, like glass stretched too thin. When he finally reaches me, standing close enough that I can smell his cologne and see the fine lines around his eyes, he seems almost surprised to find himself there. The noise of the auditorium fades to a distant hum. We stand facing each other in this bubble of sudden quiet, two people who have spent 2 years maintaining careful distance, now separated by barely 3 feet of charged air. Up close, I notice things I've trained myself not to see. The way his shirt fits across his shoulders, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the fact that his hands are trembling almost imperceptibly. He opens his mouth as if to speak, then closes it again. The gesture is so unlike him. This man who has never been at a loss for words, who can dissect the most complex literary themes with surgical precision. Seeing him uncertain makes something flutter in my chest, dangerous and unnamed. Finally, he finds his voice. "Nathaniel, do you have a moment?" It's not quite a question, not quite a command. Something in between, spoken in a tone I've never heard from him before. Quiet, almost cautious, stripped of the authority that usually underpins his every word. The way he says my name, not Morrison, as he has for 2 years, but my first name, soft and careful on his tongue, makes my skin prickle with awareness. I nod because speech seems beyond me at the moment. Whatever this is, whatever he wants to say, I need to hear it. Even if it's just professional courtesy, a final piece of academic advice before I disappear into the wider world. Even if it changes nothing. But I know, with a certainty that sits heavy in my bones, that this is not professional courtesy. He gestures toward the exit, and we begin walking together through the crowd. People part around us without conscious thought, caught up in their own celebrations and farewells. No one pays attention to the recently graduated student and his former professor making their way toward the doors. No one notices the careful space we maintain between us, or the way neither of us seems to know what to do with our hands. The early evening air hits us as we step outside, cool and sharp after the stuffiness of the auditorium. The campus spreads out before us, familiar pathways and buildings golden in the slanting light. Students and families cluster on the front steps, posing for photographs that will live in albums and social media feeds for years to come. The scene is peaceful, normal, utterly at odds with the tension humming between Professor Hale and me. We walk in silence toward a quieter section of the courtyard, away from the main flow of people. My graduation gown rustles with each step, an unfamiliar sound that seems too loud in the evening stillness. When we finally stop, it's beside one of the old oak trees that the campus, its branches creating a canopy of green shadow above our heads. Professor Hale turns to face me, and I see something in his expression that makes my heart stutter against my ribs. Not the composed instructor who has shaped my academic life for 2 years, but someone younger, more vulnerable. Someone who looks like he's standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. He takes a breath, and when he speaks, his voice carries none of its usual classroom authority. You're finished now. No longer my student. The words hang between us like a bridge he's testing, unsure if it will hold his weight. There's something rehearsed about the phrasing, as if he's practiced this moment in private, standing before his bathroom mirror or pacing the length of his office after hours. His eyes search my face, looking for something I'm not sure I know how to give. The late afternoon light filters through the oak leaves above us, casting shifting patterns of shadow and gold across his features. This close, I can see details I've spent 2 years pretending not to notice. The way his collar sits against his throat, the small imperfection where his nose was broken years ago and healed slightly crooked, the fact that his usually perfect hair is disheveled from running his fingers through it, which means he continues, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. I can finally say what I haven't. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Everything I've told myself for 2 years, that I was imagining things, that the tension between us was one-sided, that whatever I thought I felt was just misplaced admiration for a demanding teacher, crumbles in an instant. He's confirming what I barely dared hope, that the careful distance, the professional boundaries, the way he was harder on me than anyone else, all of it meant something more than academic rigor. My mouth goes dry. I stare at him, this man who has occupied so much space in my thoughts, who has pushed me and challenged me and made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Standing here in civilian clothes instead of his usual pressed shirts and blazers, he looks younger somehow, more human. The late light catches the silver threading through his dark hair, and I realize with a start that I want to touch it, to run my fingers along his jawline, to close the distance between us and discover what his mouth tastes like. The thought terrifies me, not because I don't want it, but because I want it so desperately it feels like drowning. He clears his throat, a nervous gesture I've never seen from him before. Would you, he begins, then stops. Starts again. Would you have dinner with me? Tonight. The question is so simple, so ordinary, and yet it contains entire universes of possibility. This is not the voice of Professor Hale, issuing instructions or challenging my interpretations of Browning. This is Dorian, and somehow, without my conscious permission, I've started thinking of him by his first name, asking me out like any other person might. Vulnerable. Tentative. Nothing like the commanding presence who has dominated my academic life for 2 years. I should say no. I should thank him politely, cite the need to celebrate with my family, make some excuse about early mornings and job interviews. I should maintain the careful distance we've both worked so hard to preserve, even as it was killing us by degrees. I should be sensible, practical, the good student I've always been. Instead, I hear myself saying yes. The word escapes before I can think better of it, soft and breathless but unmistakably clear. His eyes widen slightly, as if he hadn't expected me to agree, as if he'd prepared himself for rejection and now doesn't know what to do with acceptance. For a moment, we simply stand there looking at each other, the weight of what we've just agreed to settling around us like evening fog. He suggests a small Italian place downtown, somewhere quiet where we can talk. Not the kind of restaurant where professors take promising students for academic discussions, but the kind where 2 people go when they want to discover who they are to each other outside the roles that have defined them. I know the place he means: candlelit tables, soft music, the sort of intimate atmosphere that makes conversations feel like confessions. We agree to meet in an hour. That gives me time to go home, to shower off the ceremony's dust and anxiety, to change out of my graduation regalia and into something that feels more like myself, or perhaps more like the version of myself I'm about to become. As we part ways in the courtyard, our hands brush briefly, an accident that feels anything but accidental. His fingers are warm, slightly rough from years of grading papers with fountain pens. The contact sends electricity shooting up my arm, and from the way his breath catches, I know he feels it too. I watch him walk away, noting the way his shoulders have lost some of their rigid set, how his stride seems less measured than usual. When he reaches the edge of the courtyard, He turns back once, catching me still staring. Instead of the embarrassment I expect to feel, there's something else. Anticipation, curiosity, the thrilling terror of standing at the edge of unknown territory. My parents find me a few minutes later, full of pride and questions about my future. I smile and hug them and let my mother fuss with my cap while my father takes dozens of photos. But part of me remains in that moment under the oak tree, replaying the way Dorian's voice cracked slightly when he asked me to dinner, the way his eyes held mine as if he were memorizing my face. Everything is about to change. I can feel it in the cooling air, in the lengthening shadows, in the way my heartbeat has shifted to a new, unfamiliar rhythm. Tonight, I will sit across from the man who has shaped my mind for 2 years, and we will finally discover what exists between us when all the classroom walls come down. The restaurant is exactly as I imagined. Small tables clustered beneath warm lamplight, the soft clink of wine glasses mixing with quiet conversation. Dorian is already there when I arrive, seated at a corner table that offers privacy from curious eyes. He's changed into dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Without the armor of his professional attire, he looks approachable in a way that makes my chest tighten with possibility. He stands when he sees me, a gesture so automatically courteous, I wonder if he's even aware of doing it. There's nervous energy radiating from him, visible in the way his fingers drum against his thigh, the way he can't quite meet my eyes as I approach. This is new territory for both of us, and neither of us has a map. The first few minutes are awkward, stilted with the weight of 2 years' worth of careful boundaries suddenly dissolved. We order wine, something rich and red that stains our lips and loosens our tongues. He asks about my job in Portland, my plans for the future, safe topics that feel like small talk between strangers rather than the charged conversations we've had about Victorian poetry and social reform. But then something shifts. Maybe it's the wine, or maybe it's the way the candlelight softens the sharp edges of his face. But gradually the man I knew only as Professor Hale begins to emerge as someone more complex, more human. He tells me about his first teaching position, how he threw up in the faculty bathroom before every lecture for the first month, how he still gets nervous before particularly difficult classes, still questions whether his students are learning anything meaningful or just memorizing facts for exams. I watch his hands as he talks, the way they move to emphasize points or pause mid-gesture when he's searching for exactly the right word. These are the same hands that have graded hundreds of my pages, that have held fountain pens and turned book pages and gestured toward passages that would change how I read forever. But tonight they seem different, more personal, more real. He laughs at something I say about my thesis research, and the sound catches me off guard. It's rich and genuine, nothing like the measured responses I'm accustomed to hearing in class. This laugh comes from somewhere deep in his chest, and it transforms his entire face, erasing years of professional restraint. I find myself saying whatever I can to hear again. The stories begin to flow more freely as the evening progresses. He admits to the loneliness of faculty life, the way academic careers can isolate you from the normal rhythms of human connection. Long nights grading papers in his apartment, surrounded by books that provide intellectual companionship but little warmth. Departmental politics that drain enthusiasm for the work he once loved. The particular exhaustion that comes from pouring yourself into students who may never understand the gift you're trying to give them. I tell him things I've never said aloud. How his classes terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. How I would rewrite essays obsessively because I couldn't bear to disappoint him. How his approval became something I craved more than food or sleep. How I would arrive early just to watch him prepare for class, drawn to the ritual precision of his movements. He goes very still when I say this, his wine glass halfway to his lips. The admission hangs between us, more revealing than I intended. But instead of the embarrassment I expect, there's something else in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or relief that I've finally given voice to the undercurrent that has run beneath all our interactions. The conversation deepens as the evening progresses, moving beyond safe academic territory into more dangerous waters. We talk about books we love, not for their literary merit, but for the way they made us feel. About the difference between the lives we planned and the ones we're actually living. About the strange alchemy that happens when minds meet across classroom desks. The way teaching and learning can become something more intimate than either party expects. He tells me about watching me grow as a writer, how my early essays showed promise but lacked confidence, how gradually I learned to trust my own insights and defend them with passion rather than apology. How proud he felt when my final thesis came together, how he had to resist the urge to write more praise in the margins than professional decorum allowed. I confessed to the way his voice would affect me during lectures, how I would find myself watching his mouth form words and lose track of their meaning entirely. How I developed theories about his personal life based on tiny details, the expensive watch that suggested family money, the way he never mentioned anyone waiting at home, the occasional exhaustion that shadowed his eyes during particularly difficult weeks. We're building something between us with these revelations, constructing a new understanding brick by carefully placed brick. Each confession brings us closer to acknowledging what neither has dared to name directly. The careful distance we've maintained for 2 years is dissolving with each shared glance, each moment of laughter, each story that reveals the person behind the role. By the time our plates are cleared and the wine bottle emptied, something fundamental has shifted between us. We're no longer professor and student, no longer bound by institutional expectations and professional boundaries. We are simply two people who have discovered they see each other more clearly than either realized, who have been dancing around an attraction neither dared acknowledge until now. We walk slowly after dinner, neither of us ready for the evening to end. The city hums around us with its familiar nighttime rhythm, distant traffic, the soft buzz of streetlights, voices drifting from open windows above. The wine has left me loose-limbed and honest, every nerve ending hyper-aware of his presence beside me. Our shoulders brush occasionally as we navigate the narrow sidewalk, each contact sending small shocks through my system. The conversation continues in fragments, observations about the buildings we pass, memories triggered by familiar corners. But underneath the casual words runs a current of electricity, the awareness that something irrevocable is building between us with each step. The professional masks we've worn for 2 years have been thoroughly discarded, left behind with the dinner plates and empty wine glasses. He tells me about the night he decided to become a teacher, how he was barely older than his students and terrified they would see through his carefully constructed authority. How he learned to create distance as a survival mechanism, to keep his personal feelings locked away where they couldn't complicate his professional responsibilities. How that distance became a habit, then a prison, until he forgot how to let people close enough to matter. I understand what he's really saying, that I matter to him in ways he hasn't allowed himself to acknowledge, that whatever exists between us has been growing despite his best efforts to contain it. The revelation makes my chest tight with a mixture of elation and terror. This is what I've wanted without daring to name it, the confirmation that the pull I've felt hasn't been entirely one-sided. We reach the corner where our paths should naturally divide. My apartment building, visible 3 blocks to the east, is somewhere across the downtown district. This is the moment where we should shake hands or exchange polite thanks for a lovely evening, where we should retreat to our separate spaces and pretend the last few hours were just dinner between former teacher and student, nothing more complicated than academic courtesy. But neither of us moves to leave. We stand beneath the amber glow of the streetlight like actors who have forgotten their lines, the city flowing around us while we remain suspended in this bubble of possibility. The silence stretches between us, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken questions. He breaks first, his voice so quiet I have to lean closer to hear him properly. I was harder on you than anyone else. The words come slowly, as if he's pulling them from some deep place he's kept locked for years. Because I saw what you could be. Because you. The sentence trails off, unfinished, but the weight of it hangs in the air between us. I wait, barely breathing, for him to complete the thought. Around us, The city continues its nighttime symphony. A car, doors slamming in the distance. Laughter spilling from a late-night cafe. The soft whoosh of wine through the trees that line this particular street. But all of it fades to background noise compared to the intensity of this moment. Because you mattered more to me than I allowed myself to admit. The confession hits me like a physical blow, stealing what little breath I have left. Every interaction we've had over the past 2 years suddenly reframes itself in my memory. The extra attention he paid to my essays, the way his criticism always pushed me towards something better rather than simply tearing down what I'd written, the strange energy that seemed to crackle between us during office hours when we were alone with books and ideas, and the dangerous intimacy of minds meeting. It wasn't just professional interest. It wasn't just good teaching. It was care and attraction and all the complicated feelings he'd buried beneath layers of appropriate behavior and institutional boundaries. He'd been as affected by me as I was by him, fighting the same internal battle between what was proper and what was real. My heart hammers against my ribs, so hard I wonder if he can hear it. This is the moment I've imagined in fragments during sleepless nights, the conversation I've rehearsed in my head without ever believing it could actually happen. But imagination falls short of reality. The way his eyes search my face in the streetlight, the vulnerability in his voice, the sense that we're balanced on the edge of something that will change everything. I could step back, make some excuse about the lateness of the hour, the wine making me sentimental, the need to process this revelation in private. I could maintain the safe distance that has defined our relationship, even as it's been killing both of us by degrees. I could choose safety over truth, caution over the terrifying possibility of getting everything I've wanted. Instead, I step closer. The movement is small, barely a foot of concrete crossed, but closes the careful space we've maintained between us. Close enough now to see the way his pupils dilate in the amber light, to catch the sharp intake of breath that tells me he understands exactly what I'm offering. Close enough to smell his cologne mixed with the wine on his breath, to count the individual lashes framing his storm-gray eyes. He goes very still, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever spell has settled over us. But his hand lifts slowly, hesitates in the space between us like a question being asked. I answer by closing the remaining distance, letting my fingers brush against his. The contact is electric, sending heat racing up my arm and settling somewhere deep in my chest. Neither of us speaks. Words seem inadequate for this moment, too clumsy to contain the weight of what's passing between us. His thumb traces across my knuckles, a touch so gentle it makes my breath catch. 2 years of careful boundaries dissolving in the space of a heartbeat, replaced by something raw and honest and infinitely more dangerous. We part at the corner eventually, though neither of us seems eager to break the spell that has settled over us. The practical world intrudes with its demands, late hours, early mornings, the simple fact that we can't stand under this streetlight forever, no matter how much we might want to. When he finally steps back, his fingers trailing away from mine with obvious reluctance, something passes between us that feels like a promise neither of us knows how to articulate yet. He offers to walk me home, and I almost say yes. The thought of extending these last precious minutes together pulls at me like gravity. But something stops me, perhaps the recognition that we need time to process what's happened, space to let the magnitude of this shift settle into our bones. So I decline with a smile that I hope conveys understanding rather than rejection, and he nods as if he feels the same pull toward caution. The walk back to my apartment passes in a blur of streetlights and quiet sidewalks. My feet know the way without conscious direction, which is fortunate because my mind is entirely occupied with replaying the evening's revelations. Every word he spoke over dinner, every glance across the candlelit table, every moment when his carefully constructed professional facade slipped to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. Inside my apartment, I don't immediately turn on the lights. I stand in the familiar darkness of my living room, still wearing the clothes I chose so carefully for what I thought would be a simple dinner. The space feels different now, charged with the knowledge of what's transpired. Even the air seems to hold more possibility than it did this morning. When I finally flip the switch, the first thing my eyes find is my graduation cap, abandoned on the coffee table where I tossed it hours ago in my hurry to change for dinner. The black fabric is wrinkled, the tassel bent at an odd angle from being handled by too many excited relatives during photo sessions. It looks smaller than I remember, somehow diminished, like a costume from a play I no longer remember auditioning for. I pick it up, running my fingers over the stiff cardboard and cheap polyester. This morning, this cap represented the culmination of 4 years of careful study, the symbol of my transformation from uncertain freshman to confident graduate. Now it feels like something from another lifetime, belonging to a version of myself who didn't know that Professor Dorian Hale had been fighting his own battle with feelings that mirrored my own. The person who wore this cap 12 hours ago believed he was saying goodbye to his strict literature professor forever. The person I am now knows that goodbye was actually the beginning of something neither of us had dared imagine possible. The careful boundaries that defined our relationship have been not just crossed, but completely redrawn, replaced by honesty and vulnerability and the terrifying prospect of discovering who we might become together. I set the cap aside and move through my evening routine on autopilot, washing my face, brushing my teeth, changing into sleep clothes that feel strange against skin that still remembers his touch. But my mind remains entirely occupied with the memory of his voice when he confessed that I mattered to him, the way his eyes searched my face in the streetlight as if memorizing every detail. Lying in bed, sleep seems like an impossibility. My thoughts circle endlessly around the evening's events, trying to process the reality that the connection I felt wasn't one-sided, that the careful distance he maintained in class was protecting something real and precious and mutual. The revelation feels too large to fit inside my head, too momentous to be contained by the ordinary boundaries of my small apartment. The city settles into its late-night rhythm around me. Distant sirens, the hum of traffic from the main thoroughfare 6 blocks away, voices drifting up from the sidewalk below. Somewhere across town, Dorian is probably lying in his own bed, staring at his own ceiling, wondering what comes next. The thought of him alone in his apartment, perhaps as sleepless as I am, sends a warm pulse through my chest. My phone buzzes against the nightstand, and my heart performs a small acrobatic routine before I can reach for it. The message is simple, just 4 words glowing on the dark screen. Made it home safe. I stare at those words for a long moment, feeling their weight. They're ordinary on the surface, the kind of courteous update anyone might send after an evening out. But underneath their simplicity lies so much more: care, consideration, the acknowledgement that tonight mattered enough to warrant this small gesture of connection. I type back a brief response, then set the phone aside and finally feel my body begin to relax into the mattress. Tomorrow will bring questions that don't have easy answers, conversations about what we are to each other now, that the old definitions no longer apply. There will be uncertainty and awkwardness in the delicate work of building something new from the ashes of what we used to be. But tonight, as I drift towards sleep with the memory of his touch still burning in my palm, I'm not worried about tomorrow's complications. Tonight, it's enough to know that I'm not alone in wanting this, that the feelings I've carried like a secret for 2 years have found their match in him. Tonight, the future stretches out before us unmarked and full of promise, and I'm finally ready to discover what it might hold.